As I've been sitting with this scripture all week, you just landed on it, right? You didn't know it was coming. I've been praying about it, trying to figure out how do I talk about these words that aren't easy, right? These words that are difficult and challenging. What did Jesus mean by what he was saying in all of this passage? What is he looking for from us? Just before the section I read, it says, I came not to overturn the law, but to fulfill it. And so I think one of the troubles we get in right away is we read the first part of it, right? It says, you shall not, and then it says, commit adultery, commit murder. You shall not get divorced. You shall not be angry. And Jesus says, but I say to you. And what Jesus is trying to do here is say, not that what came before, the laws and the prophets, were wrong or bad, or that what I'm saying to you now is better. He's trying to tell us that what came before started us on the journey of how we're to live in relationship with each other, with God, and with the community around us. But sometimes that big overarching category isn't enough. That there's other things we need to consider. And so the first one he gets to is, you've heard it said, you should not commit murder. I think we could all agree with that one, right? Like, and except when I'm with my mother and I'm having to watch all the detective shows, I agree you all are not going to commit murder. If I've spent enough time with my mother and have watched enough of those detective shows, it is possible. The priest commits murder, the neighbor, the little old lady down the street, everybody commits murder, right? But we know that's not a reality. And so Jesus knows that you are not likely to commit murder. So he wants to get at what the heart is. What do we do? Some of us have really bad tempers, right? That when we get angry, we just explode and use words that aren't kind. And some of us, when we get angry, are very stony, right? We get super silent and you can see the chill spreading around us. Don't come near, there's a warning sign. And Jesus wants us to think about that inner part of ourselves, right? That anger part of ourselves. How do we move beyond that emotion that spikes and makes us either explode or get really stony silent? And figure out how to move past the anger. How to move past that emotion that is blocking us from experiencing all there is in the world. How to move through whatever it is that set us off into a place where we can deal with it. And he's particularly concerned with what will happen to the disciples. How will they talk to each other and deal with each other when they're angry? He wants those people that he's talking to, the disciples and the huge crowd, to think about how you move past that sense of anger, that sense that you are setting each other apart. And you all know there's never a church fight, right? They never get mad at each other, and people don't storm off and leave and never come back. Never happens. But Jesus knows that we're human. Jesus knows that sometimes we have been so hurt by what happened in church that we need a way to get out of it, to move past it, to move beyond the hurt. And so he invites us into a new understanding of anger and says, here's one of the ways you can deal with it. When you're feeling that way, when you're feeling that anger, that hurt, I want you to try to figure out how you can make amends with the person or the people or the community. And I want you to go do that. I want you to make that plan and figure out how to do it before you come to God. Because we all know that God is going to forgive you and accept you. But we want you to challenge yourself to figure out how to reconcile with each other. And we thought that was the hard one, right? Then he moves on to adultery and says, you should not commit adultery. But I say, if you even look at a woman, all right, what are we going to do about that? How do we even deal with that question? Because it's Super Bowl Sunday, right? What are those commercials going to be tonight? It's something that is a challenging passage for a number of reasons. One is, it's become a wedge issue in our culture, right? So like, our former Vice President, Mike Pence, won't be in the room with women unless his wife is present. Well, what does that do for women who have power and have decisions that need to be made if they can't even get in the room with you, right? Because he followed the Billy Graham rule. But many of our evangelical pastor friends have the same feeling, that they will not be in the room alone with a woman. Why is it the woman's fault that their eyes are in trouble and their bodies can't control themselves? And Jesus wants us to think about it. He wants us to think that it's not the adultery that is the final problem. It's the stages that led you up to that, right? It's the path along the way that each time you made a decision led you farther and farther away from promises you had made early on. Now here's the thing about these two sections here that Jesus gives us. One is, we have a totally different understanding of what it means to be a person than they did 2,000-3,000 years ago, right? That we have better understandings about what our biology pushes us towards and what our minds push us towards. And what we have to do is learn to live in a culture that says it's not wrong to have relationships with other people. But we need to think about how we're getting into them. Where does the line cross that makes them wrong? Is it because there are people that are hurt in the process of some of the things that we can find online now? People who have been enslaved to that process? Is there a line we need to stop because it harms others? He wants us to think about where that line is and the steps in that movement that move us from thinking, oh, that's a beautiful man, to getting into trouble, right? And he asks us to think about it because what's important is the relationship between all of us, not what is happening in that individual moment. What happens to your family when you make those decisions? What happens to your community when you make those decisions? And so he's inviting us to stop and think about it. And then he moves on to the next one. You have heard it said you shall not get divorced. But I say to you, this is one that I think Jesus would probably change his mind with nowadays. Partly because the only way to protect women and children in that day and age was to make sure that they had the male who was providing for them. And so when the male divorced them, that left the children in poverty, out on their own by themselves. And so Jesus is saying, don't get divorced, because he's thinking about the woman and children and what will happen to them. He wasn't considering some of the other issues, right? That sometimes it's not safe to be in a family. He wasn't thinking about that sometimes what is happening within the house is worse for the children than when the family breaks apart. But again, like with all of these, he wants us to think about more than just the words. He wants us to move into the implications. What happens when divorce happens? I mean, we can still say to this day, when divorce happens, the children and mother lose money. Their income plummets and the male's income rises. There's something wrong with that, right? Whatever we think about divorce, there's something wrong with the fact that women and children become damaged because of it. How do we change either the system, our understandings of marriage? How do we talk about changing how we choose who our partners are? How we learn to fight fairly? How we learn to move through the hard stuff? And how to know when it's okay to say, enough. I can't do this. And Jesus isn't done there, right? Because we got one more. And Jesus said, you heard that the law said, and this time he talks about our words. He talks about our words. Asks us to think about what we are saying and how we are saying it and what it means. He asks us to be truthful. And let's be honest, this is a hard one because we don't like to hurt people's feelings. So I have been accused of being really blunt. Or in other words, I'm not very good at white lies. Like if you ask me how you look today, you probably don't want to ask me in case you are not sure. Because I have trouble with this whole making you feel better thing, which is my word problem. But Jesus is asking us to think about those words. When we are speaking, how do our words impact other people? How do our words affect those who are in front of us? How do our words harm others? He wants us to think about those words. And he wants us to be true and honest about those words. He says, may your yes be yes and your no be no. And I don't want you to swear by all these other things that your yes is a yes. I want you to know deep inside that your words are honest and true. So I want to read to you the part, the translation that is from Eugene Peterson, because he takes this passage of Jesus that we could get lost in and makes it real. And don't say anything you don't mean. This counsel is embedded deep in our tradition. You only make things worse when you lay down a smokescreen of pious talk, saying, I'll pray for you, and never doing it. Or saying, God be with you, and not meaning it. You don't make your words true by embellishing them with religious lace. In making your speech sound more religious, it becomes less true. Just say yes or no. When you manipulate words to get your own way, you go wrong. Words matter. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Let the words that you have, and so my problem is I'm too blunt, which means I have to learn quiet. But where are you on that spectrum? Because you haven't reached that phase yet. But when your teenagers become teenagers, when the kids become teenagers, lying is like second nature, right? They don't want you to know what's going on in their lives. And how do we teach them that even when they're doing something that we probably would not be happy with, that we would rather know where they are and who they are with so that we can rescue and save them than have them lie to us and not know and not be able to find them. Let our yeses be yes and our no's be no. And I think in our culture today, this is one of those things that has become so problematic, so troubling, because we have whole people who believe that Joe Biden didn't win the presidency. A lie. And the question about that is, how do we talk about our yeses and nos when we have whole swaths of our population, 2 groups, 3 or 4 groups, that aren't even on the same page, can't even talk to each other because we don't have a shared common knowledge of who we are to be together. And Jesus wants us to think about that with our language, our words. How do our words set us apart from someone, prevent that relationship that we deeply need together? Because we can't get out of the problems of gun violence, the problems of ecological destruction, the problems, and you could list a whole host of problems, if we can't even talk to each other because we talk past each other. And Jesus wants us to realize that our words matter and that we need to listen, but we also need to hear. We need to share what is on our hearts, but we also need to accept that sometimes the worldview is different, but we need to hear and experience the challenge and figure out that point at which we connect with each other. And that's what the Sermon on the Mount is about. It's about saying that what is important is reorienting our lives to each other and to God. That if we truly believe that God is the God of love, and that love is what binds us together, then we will change how we approach the world. We will change how we interact with each other. We will embody what it means to be God's love on earth. Amen.